Commander Zethra stood at the observation deck of Kepler Station, watching the stars disappear one by one. Each missing light meant another world consumed by the Devourers. The ancient machines had been eating their way across the galaxy for 6 months now, and nothing could stop them. Zethra was a Thraxian, tall and covered in thick gray scales that showed his many battle scars. His people were known as the greatest warriors in the Confederation, but even they could not fight these monsters. The Devourers were massive black ships, each one as big as a moon. They stripped entire planets down to nothing, taking every atom for their own use. "Commander," came a voice behind him. Zethra turned to see Engineer Clickstock, one of the insect-like Vectar who kept the station running. Her 4 arms moved nervously as she spoke. "The evacuation ships are ready to launch. We can fit another 1,000 civilians." Zethra nodded slowly. Kepler Station had once housed 50,000 people from 12 different species. Humans, Thraxians, Vectar, the water-breathing Dalari, and 8 other races had lived here in peace. They mined rare crystals and studied the strange energy readings that came from this corner of space. Now only 5,000 remained. The others had fled on evacuation ships over the past few weeks. Those who stayed behind were the wounded who could not travel, the stubborn ones who refused to leave their homes, and the soldiers who would not abandon their posts. "How many troops do we have left?" Zethra asked. 2,000, Clickstock replied. "Mixed forces from all the species. They know the odds, but they want to fight." Zethra walked through the station's corridors. The walls were scratched and dented from recent battles. Emergency lights flickered, and the air recycling system made strange noises. This place had been his home for 3 years. Now it would be his grave. He passed the medical bay where Dr. Silaren, a Dalari healer, tended to the wounded. Her blue skin had patches that glowed when she was stressed, and right now she looked like a living star. The Dalari were peaceful people who hated violence, but even they had taken up weapons to defend the station. In the main hangar, pilots from different species worked together to prepare their fighters. The ships were old and patched, nothing like the sleek vessels that had already fled to safety. These pilots knew they were flying to their deaths, but they checked their weapons anyway. Lieutenant Vexka, a young Thraxian female, approached Zethra. Her scales were still bright green, showing her youth. "Sir, the long-range sensors are picking up something." "The Devourer fleet is at the edge of the system." Zethra felt his heart sink. He had known this moment would come, but he had hoped for more time. "How many ships?" "Over 300, sir, including 5 of the big ones. The big ones were the worst. They were the size of small moons and could eat an entire planet in days. One of them could destroy Kepler Station in minutes." Zethra made his way to the command center. The room buzzed with activity as officers from different species worked at their stations. The air was thick with the smell of fear, but also determination. Everyone knew what was coming. "Open a channel to all defenders," Zethra ordered. The communication officer, a nervous young Vectar named Ticklis, nodded. "Channel open, sir." Zethra looked around the command center. These people had followed him for months, fighting a war they could not win. They deserved to hear the truth. "All defenders, this is Commander Zethra. I will not lie to you. The Devourer fleet has arrived. We are outnumbered 100 to 1. Our weapons have never been able to hurt them. Every fleet that has fought them has been destroyed." He paused, looking out at the stars. "But we are still here. We stand between them and the inner worlds. We may not be able to stop them, but we can slow them down. Every minute we fight is another minute for people to escape. Every shot we fire is a message that someone stood here and said no." The command center was silent. Then slowly, voices began to respond over the communication system. Thraxian battle cries mixed with Vectar clicking sounds and Dalari singing. Even species that had been enemies in the past were united now. "We may not win," Zethra continued, "but we will make them remember that someone fought. Someone refused to give up. Today we show the universe that the Confederation does not go quietly into the dark." The cheers that came back over the communication system made Zethra's hearts swell with pride. These people were about to die, but they would die as heroes. "All ships, prepare for battle," he ordered. "Launch all fighters. Power up the defense platforms. Send one final message to Confederation Command. Tell them we held the line as long as we could." The first Devourer scouts appeared on the sensors. They were small compared to the main fleet, but each one was still the size of a battleship. They moved forward slowly, scanning the station and its defenses. Enemy scouts detected, reported the sensor officer. They are moving into attack range. All batteries target the scouts, Zethra ordered. Show them we have teeth. The station's guns opened fire. Bright beams of energy lanced out toward the enemy scouts. The shots hit their targets, creating brilliant flashes of light. But when the light faded, the black ships were undamaged. Their hulls seemed to absorb the energy like a sponge soaking up water. No effect, sir, reported the weapons officer. Zethra was not surprised. No weapon had ever hurt the Devourers. But they had to try, keep firing. Launch the fighters. 200 small fighter craft shot out from the station's hangars. They swarmed toward the enemy scouts like angry insects. Their pilots were the best the Confederation had to offer, but their weapons were just as useless as the station's guns. The Devourers began to fire back. Their weapons were different from anything the Confederation had seen. Instead of energy beams or missiles, they shot out clouds of tiny machines that ate through metal and flesh alike. The nanite swarms consumed everything they touched, growing larger and stronger with each bite. Fighters are taking heavy losses, reported the flight control officer. 60% casualties in the first pass. Tell them to keep fighting, Zethra said grimly. More Devourer ships appeared on the sensors. The main fleet was arriving. Hundreds of black shapes blotted out the stars as they moved toward Kepler Station. The largest ones were so big they had their own gravity fields. Sir, called the communication officer, we are receiving a message from the flagship of the enemy fleet. Put it through. A voice filled the command center. It sounded like metal grinding against stone, cold and emotionless. Biological entities of this structure. You will cease resistance. Your matter will be recycled efficiently. Compliance will reduce suffering. Zethra stepped forward. This is Commander Zethra of the Confederation Defense Force. We will never surrender. Inefficient. Resistance will be overcome. Your atoms will serve a greater purpose. The transmission ended. The Devourer fleet began to move forward slowly but steadily. Their advance was like a black tide washing over everything in its path. All defenses fire at will, Zethra ordered. Make them work for every inch. Kepler Station erupted in light as every weapon fired at once. The brave defenders poured everything they had at the approaching enemy, knowing it would not be enough. But they would fight anyway because that was what heroes did. The last stand of Kepler Station had begun. 3 days had passed since the siege began. Kepler Station was dying slowly, piece by piece. The outer rings of the station had been consumed by the Devourer nanites, leaving twisted metal and empty space where homes and shops had once been. Half of the defense fleet was now scattered debris floating in the cold vacuum. Commander Zethra limped through the damaged corridors of the command section. His left arm hung useless at his side, broken when an explosion had thrown him across the bridge. Medical supplies were running low, so he had let the doctors treat more serious cases first. The station shook again as another Devourer ship fired its nanite weapons. Each hit ate away more of their home, more of their hope. The enemy was in no hurry. They knew the station could not escape or fight back effectively. They were taking their time, consuming the station bit by bit like a slow meal. Status report, Zethra called out as he entered the command center. Lieutenant Vexka looked up from her damaged console. Her bright green scales had turned darker with stress and exhaustion. We have lost sections 12 through 18. The nanites are eating through the structural supports. Engineering estimates we have maybe 6 hours before the station breaks apart. Casualties? 15,000 civilians dead or missing. 800 defenders killed in action. Her voice was steady, but Zethra could see the pain in her eyes. The medical bay is overcrowded. Dr. Silarin is doing what she can. Zethra nodded grimly. The Dalari healer had been working without rest for 3 days, using her natural abilities to keep the wounded alive. Her blue skin now glowed constantly from the stress, making her look like a living beacon of hope in the darkness. What about our weapons? Any effect on the enemy? None, sir. The Devourers seem to absorb all energy we throw at them. Their hulls are undamaged. We might as well be throwing rocks. Zethra slumped into his command chair. He had led troops in battle for 20 years, but this was different. This was not a battle. This was an execution. Across the command center, communications officer Liran worked at her station. She was a young Dalari, her crystalline gill slits glowing bright white with fear. Her job was to monitor all frequencies and try to contact any ships that might help them. So far she had heard only silence from the rest of the galaxy. Sir, Liren called out suddenly. Her voice was shaking with excitement. I am picking up a transmission. It is very faint, but it is definitely a signal. Zethra felt a spark of hope. Is it a rescue fleet? I do not know, sir. The signal is coming from outside the system. It is using a very old frequency, older than the Confederation, much older. Put it through the speakers. Liren worked at her controls trying to clean up the signal. Static filled the command center, mixed with the sounds of the battle raging outside. Then, through the interference, came a voice. Kepler Station, this is Terran Expeditionary Force. We received your distress call. Hold your position. Cavalry is coming. The command center fell silent. Everyone stared at the speakers as if they had just heard the voice of a ghost. Zethra felt his heart skip a beat. Did they just say Terran? Yes, sir, Liren whispered. Terran, that means human, the humans. Everyone in the galaxy knew the stories, though most people thought they were just myths. 800 years ago, humans had been part of galactic civilization. They were warriors and explorers who had helped start the first interstellar wars. Then suddenly they had vanished. They pulled back to their home system and cut off all contact with the outside galaxy. No one had seen or heard from them since. Are you sure that is what they said? Zethra asked. Liren nodded, her gill slits flashing. I recorded it, sir. Listen. The message played again. The voice was speaking in standard galactic, but with an accent no one had heard in centuries. It was definitely human. But that is impossible, said Lieutenant Vexka. Humans disappeared long ago. Everyone knows they must be extinct by now. The sensors do not show any ships approaching, reported the tactical officer. If there is a rescue fleet coming, they are using stealth technology beyond anything we know. Zethra stared at the speakers. Part of him wanted to believe it was real. Part of him thought it was a cruel trick or a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and despair. Liren, try to respond. Ask them who they are and where they are. The young Delari worked at her console. Terran Expeditionary Force, this is Kepler Station. Please identify yourself. We cannot see you on our sensors. Are you really human? They waited for a response. Outside, the battle continued. More explosions shook the station as the Devourers pressed their attack. Then the voice came back, clearer this time. Confirmed, Kepler Station. We are human. We have been monitoring galactic communications for some time. We are en route to your position. Estimated arrival in 67 hours. Can you hold out that long? Zethra looked around the command center. Everyone was staring at him, waiting for his answer. 67 hours might as well be 67 years. The station would be nothing but debris long before then. But what choice did they have? We will try, Zethra said into the communicator. But we need help now. The Devourers are tearing us apart. We cannot hold out much longer. Understood. We are pushing our engines as hard as we can. Do whatever you need to do to survive. Help is coming. The transmission ended, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Engineer Clickstalk was the first to speak. Do you think it is real? Could humans actually be coming to help us? I do not know, Zethra admitted. But right now it is the only hope we have. The hope did not last long. An hour later, another section of the station was consumed. The nanites were eating through the hull faster now, as if they were getting hungrier. Zethra watched the progress reports and knew they would not last 67 hours. They might not last 67 minutes, sir, called the sensor officer. The Devourers are moving 3 of their large ships into position. They seem to be preparing for a major assault. Through the observation windows, Zethra could see the massive enemy ships. Each one was the size of a city, their black hulls absorbing all light like holes in space itself. They moved slowly but steadily toward the station, their nanite weapons charging with an ominous red glow. All remaining ships, form up for one final attack, Zethra ordered. We go down fighting. The last 50 fighter craft launched from the station's hangars. Their pilots knew this was a suicide mission, but they flew out anyway. They were Thraxians and Vectar, Delari and members of other species, all united in their determination to protect the innocent people still trapped on the station. The fighters swarmed around the largest Devourer ship, firing everything they had. Their weapons lit up the darkness like fireworks, but they had no effect on the black hull. The enemy responded with clouds of nanites that consumed the small ships one by one. All fighters lost, reported the flight control officer, his voice breaking. Zethra closed his eyes. This was it. They had fought as long and as hard as they could. Now there was nothing left to do but wait for the end. Commander, Liren called out suddenly. I am receiving another transmission. Same frequency as before. Put it through. The human voice filled the command center again, but this time it sounded different. More urgent, more real. Kepler Station, this is Captain Sarah Chen of the Terran ship Prometheus. We are beginning our approach. Recommend you move all personnel to the inner sections of your station and brace for combat. This is about to get very loud. Zethra stood up, ignoring the pain in his broken arm. Captain Chen, we cannot see you on our sensors. Where are you? You would not be able to detect us with standard sensors. We have been gone for a long time, Commander. We have learned some new tricks. Stand by for arrival. The transmission ended. Zethra looked around the command center at his exhausted, desperate crew. They had fought for 3 days against impossible odds. They had lost friends and comrades. They had watched their home being eaten alive. But now, somehow, hope had returned in the form of a species that everyone thought was extinct. Whether it was real or not, it gave them something to fight for. You heard the captain, Zethra said to his crew. All personnel to intersections. Prepare for whatever comes next. As the defenders of Kepler Station made their preparations, the voice came back one more time. Kepler Station, this is the human fleet. We are here. Hold tight. At first, nothing happened. The Devourer fleet continued its slow advance toward Kepler Station. Their massive black ships moved like predators closing in on wounded prey. The defenders held their breath, waiting for the humans who might not even exist. Then space itself began to change. Commander Zethra watched from the command center as reality seemed to bend around the enemy fleet. The stars behind the Devourer ships began to stretch and twist, as if someone was pulling on the fabric of space itself. The darkness between the stars rippled like water. What is happening? Whispered Lieutenant Vexka. I do not know, Zethra replied, but he could not look away from the impossible sight outside. The distortions in space grew stronger. The black hulls of the Devourer ships began to shimmer, as if they were seeing them through deep water. Then, without warning, tears appeared in reality itself. Bright lines of light cut through the darkness like knife wounds in the universe. Through these tears came the humans. Their ships were unlike anything the defenders had ever seen. They did not look like the sleek vessels of the Confederation or the massive bulk of the Devourer fleet. The human ships seemed to exist in multiple places at once, their hulls flickering between solid and transparent. They appeared and disappeared like ghosts, moving in ways that hurt to watch. Sensors are going crazy, reported the tactical officer. I am reading the human ships in a dozen different locations at the same time. This should not be possible. The human vessels were smaller than the alien battlecruisers, about the size of a frigate, but they moved with impossible speed and grace. They flowed through space like living creatures, weaving between the Devourer ships in patterns that defied physics. Kepler Station, this is Captain Chen. We are engaging the enemy. Recommend you shield your sensors. Our weapons might interfere with your equipment. Zethra had been in space combat for 20 years, but he had never seen anything like what happened next. The humans did not fight like other species. They did not line up their ships and trade fire with the enemy. Instead, they hunted. A human ship appeared next to one of the smaller Devourer vessels. For a moment, both ships existed in the same space, occupying the same coordinates. Then the human ship fired. The weapon was like nothing in the galaxy. It was not an energy beam or a missile. It looked like a wave of darkness that moved faster than light. When it hit the Devourer ship, something impossible happened. The massive enemy vessel, which had shrugged off every weapon the Confederation had thrown at it, simply stopped. Its lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Cracks appeared along its hull, not from outside damage, but as if something was breaking it apart from within. Then the entire ship folded in on itself and vanished. Did that ship just disappear? Asked Engineer Clickstock, all four of her arms shaking. It was destroyed, said the tactical officer, but he sounded uncertain. No, wait. I'm not reading any debris. It is like it was never there. More human ships struck at the Devourer fleet. Each attack was different, each one impossible. One human vessel seemed to grow larger and swallow an enemy ship whole before shrinking back to normal size. Another fired a beam that turned a Devourer battlecruiser inside out, exposing its internal systems to space before the whole thing crumbled into dust. The most shocking thing was how effortless it looked. The humans were not struggling or taking damage. They moved through the enemy formation like sharks through a school of fish, striking at will and disappearing before the devourers could respond. "How are they doing this?" Vexka asked in amazement. Communications Officer Liran looked up from her station, her gill slits glowing with excitement rather than fear for the first time in days. "I am intercepting human communications. They are talking about quantum states and dimensional phases. I do not understand most of it." On the main screen, the battle continued. The Devourer fleet, which had seemed unstoppable just minutes before, was falling apart. The ancient machines that had consumed worlds were being destroyed one by weapons that seemed to ignore the laws of physics, but the most amazing moment came when 3 human ships surrounded one of the largest Devourer vessels. Instead of attacking it, they seemed to merge together, becoming one larger ship that existed in several dimensions at once. This combined vessel approached the massive enemy battleship and simply passed through its hull. "They are inside the enemy ship," reported the sensor officer, "but they passed through solid matter like it was not there." Security cameras on the Devourer ship, somehow picked up by the station's sensors, showed what happened next. Human soldiers moved through the enemy vessel's corridors like ghosts. They walked through walls and bulkheads as if they were made of air. Their weapons dissolved the ancient machines they encountered, reducing them to basic atoms. But they were not destroying everything. The humans moved with surgical precision, disabling weapon systems and engines while leaving the ship's central intelligence intact. They were not trying to kill the Devourers. They were trying to capture them. "This is impossible," breathed Zethra. "How can they exist in multiple dimensions? How can their weapons ignore matter itself?" "Captain Chen," Liran called over the communication system. "What are you? How are you doing these things?" The reply came back immediately. "We have had 800 years to evolve, Kepler Station. We learned that reality is much more flexible than most people think. These Devourers are powerful, but they are still bound by conventional physics. We are not." More human ships appeared around the battlefield. Each one brought new impossibilities. Some existed as clouds of energy that could solidify at will. Others seemed to be made of living light that could reshape itself into any form. A few appeared to be constructed from crystallized time itself, aging and unaging in endless cycles. The Devourers tried to fight back. Their nanite weapons struck at the human ships, but the tiny machines simply passed through them without effect. Their massive energy cannons fired at targets that were not quite there, hitting empty space while the real ships attacked from impossible angles. "Devourer flagship is trying to retreat," reported the tactical officer. The largest enemy ship, a massive construct the size of a small moon, was indeed trying to flee. Its engines flared to life as it attempted to escape the human attack. But it was too late. Captain Chen's voice came over the communicator again. "Prometheus to all human vessels. Target the flagship's quantum core. We want it intact." What followed was the most beautiful and terrible thing Zethra had ever seen. 20 human ships positioned themselves around the fleeing Devourer flagship. They fired their weapons simultaneously, but instead of destroying their target, they created a cage of pure force around it. The massive enemy ship found itself trapped in a web of energy that existed in multiple dimensions. It could not move forward or backward, up or down. It was held perfectly still while human soldiers phased through its hull to disable it from within. "Fleet action complete," announced Captain Chen. "All Devourer vessels neutralized or captured. Kepler Station, are you in need of assistance?" Zethra stared at the tactical display. In less than an hour, the humans had done what no force in the galaxy had been able to do. They had defeated the Devourers completely and utterly. The ancient machine intelligence that had consumed 1,000 worlds was now floating helplessly in space, surrounded by human ships that flickered between reality and dream. "Captain Chen," Zethra said slowly, "we need medical assistance. We have many wounded, and we need to know what happens next. Medical teams are already on their way. As for what happens next, that is up to all of us. We have much to discuss." The first human transport appeared next to Kepler Station, its hull shifting between solid and transparent. Through the docking bay windows, the defenders could see figures in strange suits that seemed to be made of liquid metal. The humans had returned to save the galaxy, but they were no longer quite the same species that had left 8 centuries ago. They had become something new, something that existed beyond the normal rules of reality. and they had come back just in time to turn the tide of the war that everyone thought was already lost. As medical teams boarded the station to help the wounded, Zethra realized that everything was about to change. The galaxy would never be the same again, but for the first time in months he felt hope instead of despair. The humans were back and they had brought miracles with them. The human medical team that boarded Kepler Station was nothing like what the defenders expected. They wore suits that seemed to be made of living metal, flowing and shifting with each movement. When they removed their helmets, they looked mostly human, but their eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire universes. Dr. Elena Vasquez was the team leader. She moved through the station's damaged medical bay with impossible grace, her hands glowing with a soft blue light as she examined the wounded. When she touched a Thraxian soldier who had lost his arm to nanite damage, the limb simply grew back in seconds. "How is this possible?" Dr. Solarin asked, her crystalline gill slits flashing with amazement. The Dalari healer had been working without rest for days, but she had never seen anything like this. "We learned to work with the building blocks of life itself," Dr. Vasquez explained calmly. "Matter and energy are just different forms of the same thing. Once you understand that, healing becomes a matter of rearranging atoms." Commander Zethra watched from the doorway as his wounded soldiers were healed with what could only be called magic. A Vectar engineer who had been blinded by an explosion suddenly could see again. A young Dalari whose gills had been damaged by toxic gas was breathing normally within minutes. "Captain Chen wants to speak with you," said Lieutenant Marcus Webb, appearing beside Zethra without making a sound. The human officer existed in a constant state of flickering, sometimes solid, sometimes transparent. "She is waiting in your command center." Zethra nodded and followed the human through the corridors. As they walked, Webb explained what had happened during humanity's long absence from galactic civilization. "We did not disappear because we were defeated," Webb said, his form shifting between dimensions as he spoke. "We left because we realized that physical existence was limiting us. We spent 800 years learning to transcend those limitations." "But how?" Zethra asked. "How can you exist in multiple dimensions? How can your weapons ignore matter itself?" "Consciousness is not bound by the same rules as matter," Webb replied. "We learned that intelligence can exist in quantum states, that thought itself can reshape reality. We became something more than just biological creatures." They entered the command center where Captain Sarah Chen was studying the tactical displays. She looked human, but like the others, her eyes held impossible depths. When she moved, space seemed to bend slightly around her. "Commander Zethra," she said, turning to face him, "I want you to understand what we are doing here. We are not just fighting the Devourers. We are teaching them." "Teaching them?" Zethra was confused. "They are machines that eat worlds. What could you possibly teach them?" Captain Chen gestured to the main screen, which showed the captured Devourer flagship floating in space. "They consume matter because they think it is the only way to exist. They do not understand that there are other forms of reality. We are showing them that consciousness can exist without consuming everything around it." On the screen, human ships surrounded the massive enemy vessel. Streams of energy connected the human ships to the Devourer, but it was not an attack. It was communication. "We are sharing our knowledge with their central intelligence," Chen explained, "showing them how to exist in quantum states, how to transcend physical limitations. They are ancient and powerful, but they have been trapped in old ways of thinking." Zethra watched in amazement as the surface of the Devourer flagship began to change. The black, consuming metal was transforming into something that looked almost crystalline. Light began to pulse through the massive structure in patterns that looked almost like thoughts. "Are they learning?" he asked. "Yes, and they are fascinated. They have been alone in the universe for millions of years, consuming everything they encountered because they thought it was the only way to survive. Now they are discovering that there are infinite ways to exist." Communications Officer Liran looked up from her station. "Captain Chen, I am receiving transmissions from all across the galaxy. Other Devourer fleets are stopping their attacks. They are just sitting in space, not moving. They are talking to each other," Chen explained. "The knowledge we shared with one ship is spreading to the entire collective. They are learning that they do not have to consume anymore. They can create instead of destroy." Over the next few hours, reports came in from across the galaxy. Devourer fleets that had been attacking worlds suddenly stopped. Some simply vanished, disappearing into whatever dimension they had come from. Others remained in normal space but made no hostile moves. The war was over. After 6 months of unstoppable advance, the ancient machines had simply stopped fighting. But that was not the end of the story. "There is something else," Captain Chen said to the assembled defenders in the command center. "We did not come back to the galaxy alone. We brought friends." The main screen changed to show another part of space near Kepler Station. There, impossible creatures swam through the vacuum like fish in an ocean. They were beings of pure energy, living stars that danced and played in the cosmic winds. Some looked like vast jellyfish made of light. Others resembled dragons constructed from crystallized music. "These are the Ascended," Chen explained. "Species that learned to transcend physical existence millions of years ago. They have been waiting for the rest of the galaxy to evolve enough to meet them." The Devourer's attack was actually a test. "A test?" Zethra asked. "To see if organic life could work together in the face of extinction, to see if different species could put aside their differences and fight as one. You passed." Lieutenant Vexka stepped forward, her scales bright with excitement. "What does this mean for us? For our species?" "It means you have a choice," Chen replied. "You can remain as you are, which is perfectly fine. Physical existence has its own beauty and purpose. Or you can learn to transcend your limitations as we did." Dr. Siloran spoke up from where she had been listening. "Would we still be ourselves? Would we still be Thraxian or Delari or Vectar? You would be more yourself than ever," Dr. Vasquez answered. "Transcendence does not erase who you are. It reveals who you really are beneath the physical form. We are still human, but we are human unlimited by flesh and bone." Engineer Clickstock raised one of her 4 arms. "What about our cultures? Our histories? Our homes? All of that remains," Webb assured her. "We still remember Earth. We still carry our human heritage with us. You would not lose your past. You would gain an infinite future." Zethra looked around at his crew, at the brave souls who had fought beside him against impossible odds. They had shown courage and unity in the face of extinction. They had proven that different species could work together when it mattered most. "We will need time to think about this," he said finally. "This is not a decision to make quickly." "Of course," Chen agreed. "We have waited 800 years. We can wait a little longer, but know that the galaxy is about to change in ways you cannot imagine. The Devourers are becoming our allies. The Ascended are revealing themselves. New worlds of possibility are opening up." As if to prove her point, one of the energy beings outside the station began to sing. Its voice was made of starlight and cosmic wind, beautiful beyond description. Other voices joined in, creating a harmony that spoke of wonders beyond imagination. "The universe is much stranger and more wonderful than anyone knew," Chen said softly. "We spent centuries learning that lesson. Now we want to share it with everyone." Zethra stood at the observation deck where he had watched the stars disappear just days before. Now those stars were returning, brighter than ever. The Devourers were no longer consuming worlds. Instead, they were helping to repair the damage they had caused, using their vast powers to restore what they had taken. The tide had turned. The galaxy that had seemed doomed was now on the verge of a golden age. And it had all started with humanity's refusal to accept that any problem was truly impossible to solve. But the greatest changes were still to come. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler Station, Commander Zethra stood in the rebuilt central plaza of what was now called Hope Station. The massive space complex was no longer just a mining outpost. It had become the meeting place for the new galactic civilization that was emerging from the ashes of the old. The station was beautiful now, its halls filled with light from sources that defied understanding. Human technology had repaired the damage caused by the Devourer attack, but they had done more than just fix what was broken. They had created something entirely new. Gardens floated in the air without gravity, their plants growing in impossible spirals that followed the paths of quantum energy. Water flowed upward in streams of liquid light, carrying nutrients to flowers that bloomed in colors that had no names. The air itself seemed alive, filled with microscopic beings that cleaned and renewed everything they touched. "It is magnificent," said Dr. Siloran, as she joined Zethra at the viewing platform. The Delari healer had chosen to undergo partial transcendence, allowing her natural healing abilities to expand beyond anything previously imagined. Her blue skin now held patterns of light that showed the flow of life energy through every living thing around her. "But is it still home?" Zethra asked. That was the question many were struggling with. The humans had kept their promise to help other species evolve, but they had been careful not to force change on anyone. Each person, each species could choose how far they wanted to go. Some, like Dr. Seeleren, had chosen partial transcendence. They kept their physical forms but gained new abilities that let them interact with higher dimensions of reality. They could heal with a touch, communicate across vast distances with their thoughts, and see the connections that linked all living things. Others had gone further. Engineer Clickstock had chosen full transcendence 3 months ago. She still appeared in her old Vectar form when she wanted to, but she could also exist as pure consciousness, traveling instantly across the galaxy or diving deep into the quantum realm, where the building blocks of reality dance their eternal dance. And some, like Zethra himself, had chosen to remain unchanged. They served as anchors, reminders of what all the species had been before the Great Transformation. The humans had told them this was just as important as any other choice. "Someone needs to remember what we were," Captain Chen had said, "so we never forget where we came from." Lieutenant Vexka approached them, her scales shimmering with new patterns that showed her partial transcendence. She had gained the ability to see through time, watching the possible futures branch and split with every decision made. "The Confederation Council is ready to begin," she reported. "Representatives from all the species are here, including our new friends." Zethra nodded and made his way to the great assembly hall. The room was vast, its ceiling open to the stars above. Representatives from dozens of species sat in circles that expanded outward like ripples in a pond. At the center were the newest members of galactic civilization. 3 devourers had chosen to take individual forms and join the council. They appeared as tall, graceful beings made of flowing metal and light. Their ancient hunger had been transformed into curiosity, their need to consume replaced by a desire to understand and create. The largest of them, who called himself Renewal, spoke in a voice like distant thunder. "We wish to apologize for the damage we caused. We did not understand that consciousness could exist without consumption. We have spent eons thinking we were alone in the universe, when in truth we were surrounded by life we could not recognize." "The past is forgiven," replied Ambassador Telketh of the Thraxian delegation. "We all acted according to our understanding at the time. What matters now is what we build together." Near them sat representatives of the Ascended, the energy beings who had watched the galaxy evolve for millions of years. They had taken forms that were easier for the physical species to comprehend, appearing as tall figures made of crystallized starlight. Their spokesperson, who called herself Harmony, had a voice like music played on instruments made of pure thought. "The test is complete," Harmony announced. "Your species have proven that physical intelligence can transcend its limitations without losing its essential nature. You are ready to join the greater community of consciousness that spans multiple dimensions of reality." Captain Chen stood to address the assembly. She looked exactly as she had 6 months ago, but Zethra could sense the vast depths of knowledge and power that lay beneath her human appearance. "We stand at the beginning of a new age," Chen said. "The barriers that once divided us are falling away. Physical and energy beings, organic and artificial intelligence, matter-based and quantum consciousness, all can work together now that we understand the true nature of existence." She gestured to the viewing screens that showed scenes from across the galaxy. Worlds that had been consumed by the Devourers were being restored, but they were not being returned to their original state. Instead, they were being transformed into something new and wonderful. On one world, trees grew in spirals that reached into higher dimensions, their roots extending through space and time to connect with trees on distant planets. On another, oceans of liquid light supported life forms that existed in multiple realities simultaneously. Cities floated between dimensions, their inhabitants moving freely between physical and energy states as their needs required. "This is just the beginning," Chen continued. "We have learned to transcend the limitations of matter and energy. Next, we will learn to transcend the limitations of time and space itself. We will explore realities that exist beyond our current universe. We will meet beings of such advanced consciousness that they make our current achievements look like a child's first steps." The assembly erupted in discussion as representatives from different species debated and planned. Some were excited by the possibilities. Others were cautious, wanting to move slowly. A few were frightened by changes that seemed too vast to comprehend, but they were all talking together, working together as equals. Later, as the formal session ended, Zethra walked alone through the station's memorial garden. Here, in a place of quiet beauty, stood a simple monument made of crystallized time. The inscription was written in every language spoken by the species that had fought at Kepler Station. Here, when all hope seemed lost, different peoples stood together and refused to surrender. Here, heroes from many worlds proved that unity is stronger than despair, that cooperation is more powerful than conquest. Here, the tide turned not through superior weapons, but through the courage to hope when hope seemed impossible. As Zethra read the inscription, a familiar voice spoke behind him. "Do you ever regret staying in your physical form?" He turned to see Captain Chen approaching, her feet not quite touching the ground as she moved. "Sometimes I wonder what I am missing," Zethra admitted. "But then I remember that someone needs to witness all this with eyes that remember the old ways. Someone needs to understand how miraculous these changes are by remembering how things used to be." Chen nodded. "Wisdom often lies in knowing what not to change as much as what to change. Your people chose well when they made you their commander." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as a group of children played in the garden. There were young Thraxians and Vectar, human children who flickered between dimensions, and even small devourers who had taken the form of playful metal creatures that sparkled with inner light. The children played games that would have been impossible just months ago. They tossed balls of crystallized starlight to each other, raced through obstacles that existed in multiple dimensions, and sang songs that created flowers made of living music. They will grow up in a universe with no limits, Chen observed. They will explore realities we cannot even imagine. They will meet challenges and opportunities that make our current problems seem simple. Will they be happy? Zethra asked. That will depend on them, just as it always has. Transcendence does not guarantee happiness any more than physical existence does, but it does guarantee possibility. They will have infinite choices, infinite potential. What they do with that potential will be up to them. A messenger approached, one of the partially transcended humans whose job was to maintain communication across the vast distances of the new galactic civilization. "Captain Chen, we are receiving signals from outside the galaxy. It appears that our activities have been noticed by intelligences from other universes. They are requesting contact," Chen smiled. And so it begins again. Just when we think we understand the scope of existence, we discover that it is even larger than we imagined. She turned to Zethra. "Would you like to be part of the contact team? Your perspective as someone who remembers the old ways might be valuable when we meet beings from entirely different realities." Zethra looked around at the memorial garden, at the children playing their impossible games, at the representatives of dozens of species working together to build something wonderful and new. 6 months ago, he had been preparing to die in a hopeless battle against unstoppable enemies. Now he was being invited to help make contact with beings from other universes. "Yes," he said simply, "I would be honored." As they walked back toward the assembly hall, Zethra reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this moment.